Good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful day, and I'd like to thank the choir for that song. Y'all sound really well. It inspired me to be have a little more conviction with me being up here. The sermon for today comes from the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Today, the sermon is on something that I saw. I saw a meme that prompted this sermon. Setbacks can deeply affect us in our lives. The scripture guides our understanding as it promises that every setback is a part of a divine orchestration for our good, even when it's difficult for us to see it. Setbacks can strike us in various forms: loss, failure, disappointment, or illness. And these are moments that seem to push our lives off the intended track. Yet, the scripture assures us that there is a purpose underpinning our trials and aligning them towards our ultimate good and his divine purpose. Take a moment to think about a setback that you've experienced in your life. Consider how it affected you and what it felt like in the midst of that struggle. Recognizing these feelings and experiences is the first step in transforming our setbacks into comebacks. I remember when I was 8 years old, my friends were playing football on a rec league, and I tried hard, and I succeeded in convincing my parents to let me play. They bought me the shoulder pads, the helmet, all the gear, and I was like, yeah, this is it. I couldn't wait for the first practice. All right, so the first practice comes, we do some calisthenics. I couldn't say the word then, I still can't say it now. And we did some basic exercises to get warmed up. And then the coach had us pair off. And we did. And I paired off a guy who obviously knew the game better than I did. And we went at each other, and he knocked the wind out of me. I was done. And that was it for me. And football wasn't for me, and I felt bad because it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. It was a personal setback for me, because for the first time, something I knew that I wanted didn't work out. However, later in the coming spring, I signed up for Little League Baseball, and I played till I was 13, and that was a comeback. I was able to learn camaraderie, teamwork, and achievement, but I left playing baseball and I turned to playing soccer, which was a tremendous comeback for me. I played on select leagues in the city, and then I played on my high school team. And in my senior year, as we were starting the season in 1983, that fall, I was fortunate and honored to be named one of the 3 team captains. And it was one of the best times of my life because that season, we were undefeated. And here's a picture of the team. That's me at the top, third from left when I had hair. But that was a great year. We were a great team. Everybody knew what their position was, and we supported each other. It was an amazing moment. But yet, as we all know, the Bible is replete with stories. Oh, at the top, yeah. Sorry. Of individuals who are faced with severe setbacks, yet experience incredible comebacks through their faith and with God's intervention. Now, let's take Joseph's life as detailed in Genesis. It encapsulates dramatic setbacks, including being sold into slavery by his family, his brothers. Yet those setbacks were part of a larger plan that nobody could know or see. He ended up becoming the governor to the Pharaoh in Egypt. And because of that personal comeback, but a fulfillment of God's plan to save as many lives as possible during the famine that they had. Let's look at Paul the Apostle, the author of Romans. He experienced a significant life setback when he was blinded on his way to Damascus. And let's remember, he was a prominent Pharisee who was threatening to murder and persecute the disciples. When he was blinded by the light of Christ, who said, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And Saul responds, who are you, Lord? And it was this moment of physical blindness that led to his spiritual awakening, transforming him from a persecutor of Christians to one of Christianity's most fervent apostles. Think about that. 180-degree direction. He was adamant. He had conviction. He had purpose. He knew where his purpose was. He thought he knew, and then God set him on the right path. How do we handle setbacks in a way that aligns with our faith? Romans 5, chapter 5, verse 3 and 4 says, not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance brings about character, and character brings about hope. And when I read that, it reminded me of this. Belief brings about attitude. Attitude brings about action. Action brings about results which reinforce your belief. No? Man. Sorry. Some steps to a comeback. One, we have to assess and then accept. Understand and accept that the reality of the setback. The second step is to seek guidance and support. Turn to the scriptures, turn to prayer, turn to your church family. And then action towards recovery. Start taking small steps towards your comeback, grounded in your faith and in prayer. When we overcome a setback, it's important to acknowledge and celebrate this victory. Such celebrations can uplift your spirit and encourage others, because your experience is a testimony. And when something happens and it changes you for the better because you got through it, aren't you more likely to tell people about it because you're happy? You want to share that experience? And don't you think that helps them in their own way with something they may be dealing with? I'll give an example. I had a neighbor, just did enough to get by. He was a car salesman, okay? And he ended up getting hired by this company that did dent work. I thought he was nuts. He went and trained in St. Louis, and then he moved his family to South Carolina. Now I'm struggling. You know, I lost one job. I was supposed to get this job, didn't get it, so I found something else. Because I was a firm believer in being a provider, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me. And then about a year later, I get a phone call. Tim, I can't even remember what the conversation was about, but I can hear the confidence in his voice, the motivation. And we got to talking. And I decided I'm going to take a leap of faith. I'm going to do this. I'm going to learn a trade. Now, I've been an officer in the United States military. I've been a district manager. I played all the gamuts, and I kept running up against the same thing. People who were inefficient, that were above me, that did not want me to go past them because I was a threat. Because I was doing the job I was supposed to be doing, and they weren't. And that made me so angry, and I hated to have to tiptoe around it. So I knew what I needed was to be my own boss. And I was willing to risk everything for that. So I went. I drove a 1988 Cutlass Supreme that I took in to have inspected at Merchant Tire. And I had Tyler, who was an infant. I had Whitney, who was 2, and Marissa, who was 4. And we're sitting in this tire place, and the manager comes out to me and says, "Sir?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You got to replace that front tire." I said, "I can't. I had to borrow the money to do the repairs. I don't have any more money on me. I'm just going to have to drive it home." He goes, "Sir." I said, "You're not listening to me. I don't have a credit card. I borrowed the money to do this, because now I'm getting angry. I can't afford to do what needs to be done." And so he left, and about 40 minutes later, he comes back. He's like, "Look, I need to tell you something. I don't ever do this. But I found a good used tire to put on that car because I can't in good conscience let you go home with those kids, with that wheel, knowing it'll blow out." And I looked at him, and I said, "Thank you. And I'm going to make you a promise. As long as you're here, when I come back, I'm giving you all my business." And that's the way it was for 4 years. So anyway, I went to school. I thought I was going to fail because I didn't really grasp what was going on. And then the tide turned. And that allowed me to do what I do today. I don't have to listen to any nonsense. My actions will determine my success, both at work and with God. And sometimes we have to struggle and get setbacks before we truly see our purpose and see our light. Which is why one of the most important things that we can do is share that experience with others. One, it lets others know they're not alone with setbacks. 2, if they're still dealing with it, you give them the opportunity to possibly see the light at the end of the road. Testimonies echo the triumphs of biblical figures, showing that with God, all things are possible. Remember, God is simple, but just because it's simple doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Now, in closing, I'd like to read a story. A man from Norfolk, Virginia, called into a local radio station to share this on September 11th of 2003, 2 years after the tragedies of 9/11. His name is Robert Matthews. And these are his words. "A few weeks before September 11th, my wife and I found out that we were going to have our first child. She planned a trip out to California to visit her sister. On our way to the airport, we prayed that God would grant my wife a safe trip and be with her. Shortly after I said amen, we both heard a loud pop, and the car shook violently. We had blown out a tire. I replaced the tire as quickly as I could, but we still missed our flight, both very upset as we drove home." Talk about a setback. I received a call from my father, who was retired New York Fire Department. He asked what my wife's flight number was, but I explained that we missed her flight. My father informed me that her flight was one of the planes that crashed into the Southern Tower. I was too shocked to speak. My father also had more news for me. He was going to help. This is not something I can just sit by for. I have to do something. I was concerned for his safety, of course, but more because he had never given his life to Christ. After a brief debate, I knew his mind was made up. Before he got off the phone, he said, "Take good care of my grandchild." Those were the last words I ever heard my father say. He died while helping in the rescue effort. My joy that my prayer of safety for my wife had been answered quickly became anger. I was angry at God, at my father, and at myself. I had gone for nearly 2 years blaming God for taking my father away. My son would never know his grandfather. My father never accepted Christ, and I never got to say goodbye. Talk about setbacks. Then something happened. Now remember, this is in 2003. About 2 months ago, I was sitting at home with my wife and my son, and there was a knock on the door. I looked at my wife, but I could tell she wasn't expecting anyone. So I got up, I opened the door to a couple with a small child. The man looked at me and asked if my father's name was Jake Matthews. I told him it was. He quickly grabbed my hand and said, I never got the chance to meet your father, but it is an honor to meet his son. He explained to me that his wife had worked in the World Trade Center and had been caught inside after the attack. She was pregnant and had been caught under debris. He then explained that my father had been the one to find his wife and free her. My eyes welled up with tears as I thought of my father giving his life for people like this. He then said, there is something else you need to know. His wife then told me that as my father worked to free her, she talked to him and led him to Christ. I began sobbing at the news. Now I know that when I get to heaven, my father will be standing beside Jesus to welcome me, and that this family would be able to thank him themselves. When their baby boy was born, they named him Jacob Matthew, in honor of the man who gave his life so that a mother and a baby could live. We all have purpose. And when we experience setbacks, it's not going to change our path. But we have to maintain the strength and courage to walk through it. And if it requires talking to God, if it requires talking to others, then that's what you need to do. There's no shame in admitting that you're dealing with something. That's what the devil wants you to do. He wants you, don't say a word to nobody, keep it inside, because you don't want to embarrass yourself. The heck with that. It's what church families are for. And the love in this church is tremendous. Just remember, whatever you're going through, someone else has gone through something similar. And you can draw strength from sharing that experience.